Wonderful. Well, you need to get your expectations right, and this is possibly the week in the year, the calendar year, that has more expectations than any other. So let me just pre-warn you, because if you get your expectations wrong, you end up getting rather upset, discouraged, and want to give up. So, mums, are you listening? Don't expect to be appreciated at the end of Christmas Day. It ain't going to happen. I know it's this, if you just do enough, people will appreciate. No, it's not going to happen. You will be underappreciated, right? Next one, okay? Tell this to the kids later. They're expecting that the world will be wonderful if they just get the right presents. Is that going to come true? No, it really isn't, John. I'm sorry, mate. If you're expecting that one, you're doomed to misery and disappointment, okay? If you're expecting that your bank balance will right itself all by itself next week, then you're going to be sorely disappointed and incredibly discouraged. If you think that the Downton Abbey Christmas special will be any good, then you are just, honestly, that's a pipe dream, isn't it? Okay? But let's say you're a Christian here today. And I'm assuming that most of you are. Let's say that you get your expectations wrong about what it's going to be like living for Jesus as your king in this world. Okay, so you've become a Christian. You've come near to Jesus. You've joined his church. You're saying, yes, I want to be on board with the King of Kings. And you're a Christian saying that, and you live in Nigeria, where in the past 2 years, on an annual basis, Boko Haram have slaughtered 4,000 Christians. And you're a new believer there, and you go in, but I thought God was king. Because right now in Nigeria, it feels like Boko Haram are in charge. What gives? And if you haven't got the right expectation, what's going to happen to you? You're going to be crushed. You're going to have all kinds of crises of faith. You're going to wonder whether God is true, whether this Bible is just all made up. Or what about if you're over here in the UK and you feel that, you read this thing and your soul gets so excited and you see that Jesus is Lord, and then you go out into your workplace, you go out into your street, you go out into your school, and nobody gives a rip about this. And everybody thinks it's a waste of time. They'll talk about almost anything other than the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's power in telly. There's power at the shops. There's power in what you can get your money in. There's hope for life there. But Jesus, seriously, when I was at an awards prize giving the other night at the school, and they tried to bring some Christian stuff in, and just the audience of sort of respectable parents just went, oh. And that's just the air we breathe. And if you're a Christian trying to live for Jesus in that, and you don't expect that, if you're surprised by the fact that there's so much rejection, and it's really quite hard to live for Jesus, and people turn their back against you when you stand for him, if you don't expect that, then what's going to happen to you? Monumentally discouraged. See, the first readers of the book of Acts, which is Luke part 2, were in the Roman Empire, and that seemed like it was King, Lord, and had all the power. How are they going to keep going? They needed to get their expectations right. And that is why Acts chapter 12 is here for us. So you and I can get our expectations right. We're going to see a pattern. And the pattern broadly goes like this, okay? Terrible persecution, unavoidable suffering, but gospel growth. Okay? But we're going to see this. And I've got a Christmas treat for you. I haven't got 2 points in my sermon. I haven't got 3. I haven't even got 4. Because it's Christmas, people. How many points have I got in my sermon? Show 'em, Dean. What, there's more? 7 points, each one 20 minutes long. Isn't that great, Michelle? Or is it? Right now. I hope you haven't put the dinner on, Linda. We're going to be here a while. Okay, are you ready? Fasten your seatbelts. Hold on to your seat. We're in for a bumpy ride. Point number 1, persecution inevitable. Get your Bible open quickly. It's page 778. Look at first 4 verses. Somebody read for us nice and loud, please. Chapter 12, verses 1 through to 4. Nice and loud. Stop there. King Herod, what do we know about him? He's not very nice. None of them were. There's 4 Herods in the Bible. This is the 3rd one. This is the grandson of the one we heard about last week, who slaughtered all the babies. He has murder in his family. He was brought up with the Emperor Caligula, I'll get the right words out, who is not known for being a passive gentleman. He was violent, psychotic nutter. And so that was who he was brought up with. And Herod, although he wasn't the rightful king, sort of wheedled his way into political positions and power. He was very decadent. He loved the party lifestyle, and he didn't care what he had to do to stay prominent. This is the Herod we're talking about, a shady individual. John, keep reading for us, will you? Brilliant. So here's Herod, and he's got the might of the military behind him, and he's arrested James, the brother of John. Remember, there's James, the brother of Jesus, James, the brother of John. This is James, the brother of John, and he has him beheaded. Okay? He gets all excited about this. The Jewish sort of politicians come alongside and say, this we like, do it more. And Herod thinks, this is great. So he sends out more soldiers, rounds up Peter and probably a few others, chucks them in the clink, and the only thing that stops Peter's head being severed from his body at this point is that they're during a national holiday. And even Herod isn't going to execute somebody near the national holiday. So we're at this point where Peter's in prison, expecting that the next day he will be brought out and have his head chopped off, just like James. The rest of the church are back at home praying and in tears because they've lost one of their key leaders. Some of them are crying out and going, Lord, what on earth is happening? But we need to see here that persecution is inevitable. Now, persecution comes for all kinds of reasons, but listen to what we just had read to us. What was the reason behind the persecution here? Why was Herod doing it? Please the Jews. Why? What would he gain by pleasing the Jews? Favour, secure his power base, look good in the public, get some public opinion, bolster his own ego, all that kind of thing. Secure his position. Are we happy with that? Now, there's loads of persecution of Christian churches goes on around the world because people want to secure their power base. Think about communist Russia. They saw the Christians as a threat to that. But this one's a little bit more subtle because this is in the court of public opinion in an area where he needed to be able to maintain control by being thought well of and giving the people what they want. Now, okay, this is quite extreme and violent, would we agree? But the question is we need to see, would this kind of thing happen in Britain? Well, Anthony and I have been talking about this week because the reality is it is happening in Britain. Thankfully, nobody's heads have been severed from their body. Listen to this. Under its extremism policy, the government of the UK is now consulting on giving Ofsted legal power to investigate whether church youth groups and youth works comply with British values. Any out-of-school setting which provides instruction for children for more than 6 hours in any week would be covered. The plan would easily include holiday Bible clubs, church weekends away, summer camps, and some youth groups. In effect, Ofsted would become state regulator of religion. Okay? Now, I don't know whether you've thought about the implications of what we just heard there. So, this is what happens. Terrible, terrible atrocity in Paris. Public outcry to government. Do something. Stop these extremist nutters from... We don't want to live in a world where this kind of threat is going to come to us. Goes the government. We've got to be seen to be doing something so that we don't get kicked out of power or get described as toothless. Right, what can we do about this? Where does all this horrible wickedness come from? I know it comes from religious extremists. So it's going to be our job to guard our country against the evils of religion. How could we do that? Let's send Ofsted inspectors to monitor churches to find out what they're teaching young children. The consultation paper, which is currently happening right this second, okay, right at the moment, and it finishes on the 11th of January. They've rolled this out really quietly through the Christmas period so that people like you and I wouldn't do anything about it. The consultation paper says that the undesirable teaching which is incompatible with British values will be prohibited. Sanctions would include banning people from working with children and closing premises in order to address the harm caused by extremism, including emotional harm, whatever that is. So can you understand what's going to happen? They will send an Ofsted inspector who they believe to be qualified to assess whether or not church groups like ours, religious groups like ours, are doing any emotional harm or teaching anything that is not in keeping with British values to the children. So can you imagine them coming along and sitting there, and we don't know quite exactly what it will look like because it's very, very vague. It's almost like thought police, and they get all the power. So they'll come along and they'll say things like, they'll speak to, I don't know, Amy in the youth group, and they'll say, so have you really been taught that Jesus is the only way to know God? And Amy will go, duh, yeah, because that's how Amy answers to. She's just like straight down the line, okay. Or they'll go up to my little Emily and they'll sort of say, marriage is a good thing, isn't it? And Emily will go, yes, it's a very good thing. Between anybody, they'll say, isn't it? Yeah, says Emily. And they'll go, even between a man and a man? Emily will go, what? Seriously? That's not right, is it? Okay. Those kind of questions will come in. And what we'll be ending up with is a measure of state monitoring of religion, which isn't much different to what happens in China, which isn't a fat lot different. Not as violent yet, but it isn't a fat lot different to what happened to Germany in the 1930s. And so here we see a little government strategy that applies across the board to religious groups that will mainly be rolled out in Christian churches as the dominant religious groups in the UK. And what is happening is that we're having the erosion of our free speech, and we'll be having thought police coming telling us what we can and can't teach from the Bible. Now, on one level, that's great, isn't it? Because we know there are some things that religious people teach that are absolutely abhorrent. It's violent and it's cruel and it's hateful. But not the Christian message. Remember, we're the people who followed the man who died for his enemies and didn't try to kill them. So, well, what does this mean for us? We've got a government that's got under great pressure to get rid of religious extremism against the backdrop of a government and a media that is highly suspicious of anybody who affiliates to some sort of religion because it's just assumed you're nutters. And the vast majority of the people in the UK, if they hear that this legislation is being rolled out, i.e. check up on churches, what they're teaching, they'll go, yeah, that makes sense, unthinkingly. And so I think that this sort of, the securing of values and of political positions and going at Christians in order to do it, I think it's right on our doorstep. I'll be honest with you, this has really caught me by surprise. I was really shocked. I was thinking this will come along in about 15 years, maybe 20. It's here now. So one of the things we're going to ask you to do over the next couple of weeks before the 11th is we're going to set up some computers, and during prayer week there'll be time as well. We'll give you some outlines as to some comments that you can email off to the people who are doing the consultation to try and object to this. And the sort of things that you'll be able to say are the following. You know, I've got some written down. We'll be able to say that Christians are law-abiding citizens who support democracy and that we should not be treated as extremists because of our biblical beliefs. Christians are most likely to be victims of extremism around the world, and that's a fact. We'll be saying the government say that the government's British value policy is too broad and threatening to Christians. We'll say that it's only in countries like China that churches need some sort of state approval for their teachings and activities. We'll be saying that the government's plans are very vague and will waste massive resources by forcing the investigation of innocent people. But please make no mistake, we will be being put under more and more pressure in the public eye and being made to be misrepresented as those who are a danger and a threat to society and a danger and a threat to those who are the powerful people in media and in government. So thankfully, none of us at the moment are risking having our head separated from our body. But I think it's quite likely that many of our liberties to preach the gospel, stand up for Jesus, are under threat, possibly even our building. So within 10 years, it's quite possible that people, if this goes through, if we get a whimsical inspector who comes in and just doesn't take a shine to the way that we're trying to lovingly care for people and introduce them to Jesus, that we could have our building taken off us and we could be closed down, have our charitable status removed. I thought this was 20 years ago. It's a lot sooner by the looks of things. Okay? That was point one. None of the other points, Linda, are even closely as long as that one. Okay? So, persecution is inevitable. It happens all around the world, and it's beginning to ramp up here in the UK. Oh, sorry, I ought to just say that this also means, by the way, please do not be surprised if your jobs are at risk if you work in the public domain. If you are known as a Christian there. It's just inevitable. You work in education, you work in healthcare, you work in local governments, you work in anything like that, there's a chance that your jobs may be at risk. We're already excluded from public life in the media. We'll be increasingly excluded from public life. And there's a temptation that we might just want to keep our head down and be like those communal Christians in America. You know, you got that sort of vision of them, haven't you? They rush out to the supermarket, buy a big watch of supplies, get an awful lot of ammo for their guns and hunker down in sort of a bunker in the woods and wait for the rapture. There's a temptation that we might go that way. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to keep on pressing out with the gospel, okay? Can we do? Yeah, you want to? Okay, Jane's up for that one. If anybody wants to become a commune in Hale Wood, Jane will sort it out. She'll get the supplies. You bring the weaponry, and I'll pray for the rapture. Okay, that's the way we'll do it. All right? No, we're supposed to be proud and bold and loving and wise with the gospel. Okay, persecution is inevitable. Second of all, suffering is unavoidable. Well, I've touched on this, so I'm only going to say a couple of sentences. He, James, the brother of John, was put to death. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Why James? I don't know. Why, Lord? I do not know. Surely he's one of the chief preachers of the gospel. You don't want to lose any of them, do you, Lord? Well, it seems to me that the Lord gave James work to do, and when his work was done, he got taken. Peter, by the end of this, he's still going on preaching the gospel. It seems that Peter's job was not done. All I'm saying here is that there will be suffering and hardship come upon us if we decide to stand up for Jesus. Now, the people I'm most worried about in this room are the people who are younger than me. And we're going to be reflecting this in the way that we start to adjust some of the priorities of our church in our vision statement, much of which we've started rolling out. We'll be introducing more through the prayer meeting, you'll see more of. One of the elements that we want to do is be preparing our younger people for the fact that persecution, ridicule, opposition, and pressure will be increased over the next couple of decades. So how are we helping the church young people realise that they're going to be a persecuted minority if they stand for Jesus? We need to prepare them for that, don't we? Because suffering is unavoidable. It will come. Some of them may not be able to get places at the universities they want to go to if they say that they are Christians. Some of them won't be able to, or will lose their job because they say that they're Christians. Some of them will be pushed out of neighbourhoods. It will be made very difficult for them to just live a life in this country because they're Christians. Now that could hit my guess is that I'll probably be old and grey by the time that fully kicks in. But that's not necessarily the sake for some of the younger children here. So as a church, we want to prioritise helping youngsters in our church get ready for an unavoidable suffering that will come over the next couple of decades by standing for Jesus. Aren't I the bearer of happy news? Just in the Bible, people. Next one. Prayer indispensable. Verse 5. Somebody read verse 5 for us, please. Now that word earnestly here, that word earnestly praying to God, it literally means stretching themselves out in prayer, straining and stretching. When was the last time that we as a church were straining and stretching because we could sense and see our neediness of God to come near us, to bolster us, to live holy lives and to press out with the gospel to the community around? We don't do it very often, do we? And yet one of the things we've been seeing as we've moved through the book of Acts is that this is just something that Christians do. So in Acts chapter 1, they pray in the upper room for 10 straight days. They stretch themselves out in prayer. And the Holy Spirit comes and Peter preaches and 3,000 people get saved. Woohoo! Acts chapter 4, they pray and then God fills them with such boldness that they turn the city of Jerusalem upside down. And by the end of Acts chapter 5, the church in Jerusalem is over 10,000 people strong. Some of the harshest critics, even the priests, have come to faith. And it wasn't easy and there were casualties along the way. But they prayed and the Lord was working in them. Acts chapter 12 here, they pray and God blows up a prison, strikes down Herod, their persecutors, and Herod gets eaten by worms. They stretch themselves out in prayer. Chapter 13, we're going to see this just after Christmas. They pray and God raises up Paul to be a missionary, the greatest missionary the world has ever known. And you say, Steve, won't God do it anyway? Why does he need us to pray? Isn't he a powerful God? Well, the answer is yes. But our pattern all the way through the New Testament is the sign that God is going to do something in the future is that he's got his people praying already. Is it fair to say that if we don't pray, it won't happen? Yeah. Because you tell God's about to do something because he gets his people praying. Now, I wouldn't describe us as a prayerful church. Now, you can go away and do the maths as to what that means for how much we're going to be seeing God strengthen us, God at work, equipping us for service, giving us opportunities, and us seeing people come to faith. Now, I do think there's lots of things that the Lord has done in response to our prayers over the years that we probably haven't even recognised. And yet, I think here there's this Bible verse that says, world coming crushing at you, here's God. So you got Herod, but God's people were praying. Herod, but God's people were praying. And when God's people are praying, there is hope for the future, no matter how bleak it seems to get. His appointed means in his sovereignty is that his people will be gathering earnestly, stretching themselves out in prayer. We need to learn that together, don't we? You know, me and Anthony have even stopped recently and talked about the possibility of just stopping the sermon after 15 minutes and having 20 minutes to learn together to pray and to seek the Lord. I wonder what kind of dynamite the Lord's going to have to stick under our backsides to set off before we start praying with a real sense of neediness. Because that is what biblical Christianity is always pulling us in the direction of. Praying with that sort of stretched out sense. So there's one of the rather clever blokes from a couple of centuries ago said this. The one concern of the devil is to keep the saints from praying. And he's probably winning on that score round at the moment, isn't he? He fears nothing from prayerless studies, prayerless work, prayerless religion. He laughs at our toil, mocks at our wisdom, but trembles when we pray. Prayer turns ordinary mortals into men and women of power. It brings fire. It brings rain. It brings life. It brings God. There is no power like that of prevailing prayer. That was Samuel Chadwick. Now, we've got a prayer week coming up for Christmas, after Christmas. What do you think we want you to do with your prayer week? Sorry? Make the most of it. Somebody said, pray. Oh, dear me. Oh, dear me, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Listen, I'll be very clear with you. If you do not plan to go to prayer meetings, it won't just happen. And I don't mean to be really condescending, but I feel I need to be following some of the prayer. If you do not plan in advance and say before the start of the week, I'm going to go to that one, 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 and that one, you won't go. Am I wrong? You don't sort of suddenly fall into the prayer. Oh, look where I am. How did that happen? Oh, yeah, John. Whoa. That was like, wow. No. Listen, please, could we be a church that recommits ourselves to the task of stretching ourselves out before the Lord in prayer? So when it comes to prayer week, we're going to be mornings and evenings. If that is too difficult for you, if that is the reason you can't go is because it's really too difficult, then you need to speak to me and Anthony, because we will find a way for you to gather with people to pray. We'll work with you. But I suspect that's not the primary reason why our prayer meetings are nowhere near as well attended as they should be. So please, would you start thinking? Think with your husband, with your wife, with your kids. Think about your childcare arrangements. Think about all that kind of thing. Think about how you can help, offer to help. Think about who you're going to invite with you, who you're going to bring to the prayer meetings with you. Start thinking about that now, because if you don't think about it, prayer week will be a waste of time. We need to seek the Lord for a whole raft of things. So that's number 3, okay? Prayer is indispensable. Next one, power unstoppable. This is probably my favourite bit. So what I want you to do is as I read this, I want you to count the things that get overcome. All right? Verse 6, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard on the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, put on your clothes and sandals. And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened by itself, and they went through it. And when they had walked the length of the street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating and expecting." Okay? Now, I don't know whether you've picked this up, okay? I love Mission Impossible films. Anybody seen any of the Mission Impossible films? There is always one scene where they break into and break out of an utterly impregnable place and get something really important. It's death-defying, and they use skill and wisdom and daring, and they're just amazing, okay? This isn't that. Peter isn't Jason Bourne. He's in a maximum security prison. He is not a member of the special forces. In fact, it's stacked up here to show how impossible it is that he could ever get out. So let's go through this. So start in verse 6. What are the things stopping him going anywhere? Chains, number 1. Good. What else? So at least 16 guards, and those are just the ones nearby. Okay? He was asleep and quite passive. The whole point here was he's actually dead weight. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever tried to sort of wake up somebody who's had too much to drink. It's not a pretty sight. It goes a little bit like this. It's like, "Wake up! Put your shoes on." No, trousers first, then shoes. And you can see the angels like, "Peter, lad, get up." In fact, that word struck, it says, when the angel came, it said it struck him on the shoulder. It's that same thing as happens to Herod later when he gets struck down. So the angel comes along, grabs him by the head and goes, doof, like that, wakes him up, and he's like, "Get up, lads." And then chains fall off, door swings open, guards, well, I don't know quite what happens there. I mean, you can see, we follow it through, don't we? Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. In other words, we're supposed to understand that Peter is dead weight, the situation is impossible. This is purely and totally the initiative, control and sovereign power of a living God. Okay? This isn't a great escape, because they didn't do anything great, Peter. This was a wonderful rescue and a liberation. Do we see this? And Peter says at the end, verse 11, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches. It's all of him." And I wonder whether in the back of Peter's mind he's asking questions like, well, why didn't he do that with James? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us. But all we know is that the Lord had a purpose, even if it was nothing more than to show people like you and me that if God doesn't want to be stopped, there is no power on earth, there is no Herod, there is no prison, no chains, no incompetence of his people that is going to stop him moving forward with his gospel message. Isn't that a relief for incompetent people like you and me? If the Lord wants to bless and reign and rule over more people's lives in Speak, he can do it through a divvy like Anthony, no offence, or Steve, or John, or Matty, or Andy, or even Dean. It's wonderful. He can grab people like us and go, "Get up!" and we'll get up and there won't be anything to do that we can do to stop him. So we've got to sort of, we've got to ask those questions as to, are we reaching out right and are we doing it properly? Ask those questions, but fundamentally, the Lord, when he wants to, will march forward and there is no power on earth that can stop him. You cannot lose your job unless he permits and allows and intends it. You cannot be treated like rubbish, mocked and ridiculed in the workplace or in the school, looked down upon, unless the Lord allows it. Why he would, I don't know, but he sometimes does. But it's all under his mighty sovereign hand. And isn't it encouraging that as his people pray, he changes things? Whether it's breaking out a Peter from prison, he can change people's minds after a decision, he can redeem situations, he can intervene supernaturally, he can change the mind of a daft, well-meaning policymaker at government or media level, he can prevent people from taking our buildings off us, he can do whatever he wants. He is utterly unstoppable. And so 5, we see people unreliable. I love this. Verse 12. Then they had dawned. When this had dawned, he's like, dawn? Oh, pants. I mean, I've got a wanted notice. In fact, I'm looking at a wanted picture of me now. The guards are out and about. I need to sort myself out. I need to get somewhere safe. When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John. I'm sure she was very appreciative of that. Also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Now Peter knocked at the outer entrance and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. And I just feel for Rhoda, don't you? Forever recorded in the Bible of being a dozy blonde. Do you know what I mean? She's poor girl. She meant so well. She was brave enough to go to the front door while the rest of them holier-than-thou prayers stayed up saying, oh, you go, we're praying. And really they just don't want to go to the door in case it's the soldiers. She went to answer the door. When she recognised Peter's voice, and I take it that she was so scared she wouldn't even open the door, now what would you do at this point? You recognise Peter's voice. What would you do at this point, please? Open the door. Okay? But Rhoda doesn't do that, does she? What does Rhoda do? And how does she run back? Good answer. That's probably she used her feet, but if you look in the Bible, it says she ran. We didn't say about the feet, but I'm sure she did. She might have gone on her hands, overjoyed and excited. So she knows that this is happening. She rushes back to tell everybody else. I don't know what she's thinking at this point. And of course, she meets with a rather unexpected reply. When she recognised Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back upstairs without opening the door and exclaimed, Peter is at the door. And they do the typical spiritual thing. Don't interrupt us while we're praying. Oh, Lord, please forgive this little young lady for interrupting us while we pray for Peter's release. Please, Lord, bring him back to... excuse me, says Rhoda. Please bring him back to us. Overcome the powers of Herod. Have mercy on your enemies and don't crush them like they deserve. But bring back Peter... seriously? Please, shut it. You're out of your mind. Okay, isn't that polite? Yeah, divvy. They told her when she kept insisting, no, seriously, don't hold my hair colour against me. Honestly, seriously. No, you're just imagining it and having some sort of spiritual vision. It's more likely that an angel from heaven would come than that God would answer this prayer. But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and they all saw him, they were astonished, which is Bible language all through the Gospels for, I'm an idiot of no faith. And I'm sure they're confused. I told you to listen to... I told you to listen to... Look, Peter, we knew God would answer that prayer. Now, what do I want us to see here? People unreliable. Have you noticed there's this funny thing when it comes to prayer? As you pray, two things are going on in your head and heart. You're simultaneously believing God, but simultaneously doubting quite significantly at the same time, aren't you? I don't think any of us have ever asked 100% pure prayer when it comes to this kind of thing. We'll say things like, Lord, we know you can do it, but on past evidence, you're probably not going to. But we'll pray it anyway because you say it. And then sometimes when we get those answers to prayer, we're almost shocked, aren't we? Now, let's remember there are things that the Lord calls us to specifically pray for. And when we pray with the things that he tells us to specifically pray for, then we can be confident that he is going to be paying an awful lot of attention to those. But isn't it wonderful here that the Lord will use the prayers of unbelieving people? When I say unbelief, I don't mean totally lacking in belief, but people who perhaps feel a bit despondent, discouraged, as if, I'm not really sure whether God loves me enough or hears me or if he's even there right now. But I'm praying in faith because Jesus told me to, so I'm going to do it. The Lord is pleased to bless and answer even the prayers of, people who are unreliable. Is that an encouragement to you? Well, it is to me, because my prayers, I wish they'd got more faith oomph behind them. I really do. But the Lord he can make a way even through my faithless prayers. Isn't that an encouragement? Listen, we're nearly done. Number 6, future indisputable. We've got a little picture. I love it all the way through the book of Acts. The future is getting dragged into the present to encourage people like you and me so we know the real score. So Herod, what happens? Here we go. Verse 18. In the morning there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. Okay? That says it. Well, yeah. Next bit. This is important. Then Herod went from Judea. This was probably within the next few months or even couple of years, so it wasn't immediate after this. Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. It was like your G7, G8 meetings of nations. He went down there on a political visit. He'd been quarrelling with some of the people of Tyre and Sidon. They now joined together and sought an audience with him. Why are they doing that with this evil man? It's because they want something from him and need to pucker up and you get the idea. Having secured the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. They were up the Swanee without a paddle. They needed food, so they were even prepared to ingratiate themselves towards this tyrant and this despot. Okay? So how do they do it? On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, it's reported that his robes had sort of like a silver lining sewed into them, so that when he stood up, it was sort of like, Oscar's glamour type of thing, but cranked up a few notches, so that when the sun shone on his garments, on his robes, he would literally shine like the sun. He would look divine in some sense. So he stood up there on this appointed day, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. Now, we don't hear the content, we don't really know, but what we do is we see how the people were trying to butter him up a little bit so they get more food. This is the voice of a God, not a man. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down. That word struck, same word as what happened to Peter. Struck. But this one had not to set him free, but to bring a judgment against him. The angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. What did he do wrong? Well, he wanted to be Lord, and he didn't want to give God glory. He wanted to live as king in his own world with no recognition who God was. And he accepts the worship of other people, and it kills him. Now here what we've got is a little bit of a picture of the future being brought into the present, because here was a tyrant who wanted to play God in God's world, and he got in the short term what anybody will get in the long term if they want to play God in God's world. So what we've got is an indisputable future that one day we will be called to account for the way we've lived before God. And if it weren't for Jesus Christ, I would get what Herod got. Because that's what I deserve. For all my little kingdom building, for all my self-absorption, for all my using of other people, for all my disrespecting of God, for all my making him small and making me big. I deserve exactly what Herod got. I deserve to be struck. But Jesus was struck. And he paid the price for me so that my sin will not be counted against me. And my soul is being set free by his Spirit. and I'm made new by being one of his people as I wait for that great day where all the wrongs will be righted. Those who bring harm against his people will be judged. Sometimes it happens in the short term, doesn't it? And we see it on the news, or we hear about it in a Christian report or a testimony letter, and we see that the prayers of God's people, that the Lord has removed and flattened somebody who was very cruel to his people. And we rejoice at that. But make no mistake, sometimes there are people who seem to get away with it. And you wonder, Lord, don't you know what they're doing? Have you missed it? Are you asleep at the wheel? Have you forgotten? Aren't you watching? Pay attention, Lord. Deal with them now. And the Lord's very happy to say, because of my plans and my purposes, don't worry. He, she, they will face the consequences of this if they do not turn to Jesus. But it will be according to my timing, not yours. Eternally, all sin against me will be answered for. And we're supposed to take a lot of comfort for that. I wonder whether those Christians in Boko who have lost family members to the cruelty of Boko Haram in Nigeria, I wonder whether they find comfort in that. I bet they do. They know that Boko Haram is not too big for them. Whatever our government decide, buoyed up by the media, whatever they decide will happen in terms of persecution against Christians and increasing opposition, some of it will get dealt with in the short term, but some of it will be answered for eternally. And I want us to have confidence in that. None of this is missed by God. He knows, and he will deal with things in the end. Listen, finally, one last thing. Growth unstoppable. But the word of God continued to increase and spread. The word of God continued to increase and spread. It's amazing, isn't it? This whole series of things try and crush the church, and guess what happens? It comes back stronger and thrives. Here's the pattern I mentioned at the beginning, okay? Persecution is unavoidable. It will happen. And maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons where nationally our church, the Church of Jesus Christ nationally, doesn't seem to be getting much in the way of growth is because we're waiting for the build-up of steam behind a growing persecution of Christians in the Western world. It could be that things seem slow and growth seems slow in Speak, in Liverpool, in our nation, across the West, because the Lord is moving the cranks of persecution and it's coming slowly. And as that happens, persecution, which is unavoidable, then there's a measure of suffering that is, again, unavoidable. But then through it will come the opposite of what the persecutors expect, unstoppable growth. So I wonder whether, maybe for some of us in this room, our job is to stand firm, be faithful, keep speaking about Jesus, but not be too surprised if the number of people who turn to him is small for the next generation. Maybe it'll be our youngsters who we've taught to be faithful missionaries. When the heat gets turned up in this country, will be the ones who experience the growth, and it will come on the back of our faithful teaching and our stretching ourselves out in prayer. I wonder whether that is the pattern. I suspect, according to church history, it will be. According to this bit of the Bible, it will be. So our task is to be ambitious with the gospel, get our expectations right so we're not disappointed or surprised, and be faithful, trusting that our God is totally and utterly in control. We're going to sing again. What's our finishing song? Oh, we've got 2 songs. Lovely. What are our 2 songs?